Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. So it's the Tuesday, September 22nd Tax-Exempt Review Committee meeting, and it's 1:02, and we are clear that we don't have a quorum today. So in the interest of time, what we're going to do is agenda item number 1 is to review the minutes. We will just delay that, and then so we have 2 items on the agenda. We'll have both of those go on the agenda, and then what we'll do is in the next 2 weeks we'll have an online or phone-in meeting of the committee where everybody will be able to vote on the projects. The fortunate thing is they'll be able to review your presentations online at their leisure, and then we'll set a time to get the votes to do our meeting. And I will say it's very difficult for people to attend when it's 80 degrees in September, and so I guess that's part of the difficulty. With that, Jim, we get us started. So what we're going to do is we're going to skip agenda item number 1 and move to number 2, application for pilot for Aldevron LLC. Jim.
Yeah, this is an application for payment in lieu of taxes for Aldevron. They're located at, or this location would be on the corner of 30th Avenue South and University. You can see the map, the location, University North-South, 32nd Avenue, east to west. The application, it creates some additional jobs. They've I'll go over a couple of corrections on the application here in a little bit. This Aldevron, as some of you maybe recall, has actually received 2 pilots in the past for 2 other expansions, and they really overperformed as far as the projected jobs and the actual jobs. So in 2016, they had 106 employees. Then they had projected to add 85 people over the next 5 years. What happened instead was it only took 3 years, and they added 192 jobs, over double the number of jobs that were projected. And then last year, when they were up to 298 employees, they had another expansion, expected over 5 years that they'd create 105 jobs. And in just 1 year, they have added 117 positions. So happy to have a company in our community that's adding lots of good paying jobs. This particular application, again, we're now at 415 employees. They're projecting over the next 5 years, 51 jobs. The past is any kind of expectation of what we'll have in the future, we may see certainly more jobs than this. I do want to point out a couple things in the application on error that I had made helping them out to fill it out the first time. I had pulled the wrong mill levy. That was actually West Fargo's mill levy, and so the Fargo School District mill levy is showing there in red, as well as the revised value of the exemption. On page, so just past page 4, I believe on page 6 of your packet, you'll see then the what they would pay in property taxes after 5 years was also updated. And so what happened with this company is they would pay no property taxes for the first 5 years except on the land, and then in years 6 through 10 they would pay half of what they would normally have to pay, although there's a 2% escalator on that, and so it would gradually, so it would start at $46,000 and increase to $50,000. Those are the things I wanted to point out. Troy from Aldevron is here, and so I'd like to have him get up and talk about the company. It's quite complicated, the things they're doing out there, but they're very successful, and maybe give us an overview of the company and where you expect to go in the future.
Thank you. My name is Troy Brendemiel. I'm the controller for Aldevron, and Aldevron is a biomanufacturing company founded about 22 years ago here in Fargo, and the main manufacturing we do, and I'm not a scientist, but we manufacture DNA, mRNA, and proteins at different quality levels. Our previous pilot that we requested was for our clinical grade manufacturing. This project is more of a research grade and an R&D facility that will be, it's an existing facility that we're going to fit up to be able to manufacture at a research grade quality level. And as is up on the screen, our projections are to add approximately 50 new jobs in this facility. Our go live in this facility to have it all up and running is approximately Q2 of next year. Should get kind of going on it late this year, December probably timeframe, and hope to be occupying it in Q2 of next year. Just want to open up if you have any questions on what we do or what this project is, what we'll be doing with it.
Do we have any questions? I guess, to me, on page 3, where you talk about the positions, it's what catches my eye is that there's 20 positions at $15 to $20 an hour, 24 positions at $20 to $28 an hour, 5 new positions at $28 to $35 an hour, and 2 over $35 an hour. So obviously those are well-paying jobs and things like that. So I think that's
Correct.
very impressive.
Yeah, there'll be scientists and operators in the labs. There'll be some quality control individuals, and then there's also different levels of management as you go up those salary scales as well.
So, if you don't mind putting up with my lack of intelligence, but can you talk about, so you talk about research quality, is that the technical, what does that mean? Does that mean it has to be even to a higher standard? Can you talk a little bit about that in layman's terms?
Sure, yeah, the research grade is at the lowest level of quality. So there's some pharmaceutical companies that will start with the research grade quality level and kind of use that as their testing and gear up to, and we'll help them improve the methods and the right process. And once we help them get that figured out, it will get moved up into a higher quality level, which is in our other facility that we're manufacturing.
Thank you. Is there any other questions as far as the specifics of this? And I don't know if there's basically for the first 5 years, Jim, it's full and then it gradually decreases after that. Is that how you would describe that?
Not quite like that. It'll be at the 50% level from years 6 through 10, but there's a 2% growth on that. So it stays at about the same amount, just goes up 2% each year. So, and then by year 10, it would be, or year 11, it would be back up to the full property taxes.
Very good. Any other questions? Otherwise, thank you very much for the presentation. I apologize for not having our full group here, but we will take action on it and then it will go on to the City Commission. So thank you very much.
Thank you, appreciate it.
You bet. Very good. And now we'll move on to agenda item number 3, application for TIF for the river lots. Jim.
Okay, I don't think that's the official name. I think I saw it on one of the slides. Austin was things are still thinking about what they're going to call this, but we'll call it Oak Grove Residences for today. What I'd like to do is just have Austin kind of explain the project. We can go through some slides here. You should note that the Planning Commission, City Commission has already approved the zoning on this. So really the issue here today is whether or not they would be able to receive tax increment financing for that. So we'll have Austin go through the presentation. We have our financial advisor, Matt Schachlenberger from PFM on the line. He'll get on and kind of walk through his report. And then I should also note, take a look in your packet. There's an email from the city engineer who points out that the dike that would go in with this project would, provide some better flood protection in Fargo. But Austin, why don't we have you go through the project and explain what the goal is here.
Hello. Is this on? Does it matter for, oh, there we go. Look at that. Thank you guys. Wanted to touch on this, and Jesse can chime in whenever you'd like, because this has been truly a project in development and real estate. Sometimes you end up with projects that end up being more of a labor of love than anything else, and this one's one of those. You have a very, very special site near downtown Fargo that has one opportunity to become something that lasts a lifetime and more. And as we've progressed through this, and Jesse's worked on it for a number of years before we partnered up together on it, and it's an extremely challenging project, but also something that could be really special for Fargo long term. You can go to the next slide. So high level wise, project is the first true mixed residential from a rental and home ownership standpoint. This project was something that Jesse, even prior to us working together on it, he was really dedicated to the neighborhood and making sure that what was going to be delivered was something that the neighbors and the community within the small surrounding area is something that they'd be proud of, and something that was collaborative in nature. And this rarely happens in development. Lots of the time when you have single family residences next to something that would be a relatively dense a rental condo project, you end up with a situation where you have battling competing desires. So I was really impressed when Jesse and I got together and we had our first neighborhood meeting, and we had a number of neighbors present via a Zoom meeting. And I was really impressed with the fact that Jesse, over many years, went through the process of design development to have a neighborhood community that was interested in the project, was very passionate about it being something that made sense from a design aspect and that would add value to their neighborhood and encourage reinvestment in the community. So we came up with this plan, somewhat difficult to achieve, is 117 apartment rental units on floors 1 through 3. And then the neighborhood had a strong desire, and from a financial aspect, it simply didn't work without a home ownership option. So the top floor is 14 condo units. That was something that the neighbors wanted, so that there would be some home ownership attentiveness in the project. And we liked it because basically without it, the project was again dead after many, many years of many different plans. So we worked with the neighbors on figuring out how to fit the necessary parking. That was very concerning for them, that they didn't want a project where you ended up spilling parking onto their neighborhood community streets and lock jamming those. So we fit 2 levels of underground parking. One is partial, but 2 levels of underground parking. One portion of it serving the rental residences, and then one separate portion serving the condominiums. And we thought that was also necessary to have some separation for the condo residents' vehicles and extra storage, since they're buying something that where storage is just limited. We had a club room, fitness center, rooftop patio, bike storage, and pet spa. We worked with actually a couple different architects on schemes, and we landed after about 22 iterations, one that we felt really fit well within the neighborhood. And it was really important to us that this Oak Grove neighborhood has history. It has context. The exteriors are a mixture of American craftsmen, some arts and crafts. And we think that this is sort of that mix with those materials represented, and then sort of the top floor anchor. You can go to the next slide. So this is just a brief history on this site. You can drive by the site, and it is something special. We have a couple houses in a rental property that needs to be taken down in order for this project to move forward. But as Jesse encountered it, as we encountered together, there's absolutely the worst soil issue that I've ever encountered in a decade of working on projects that needs to be corrected. There's a levee that needs to be constructed, that in working with the engineering department, there's no way to have the city pay for it or have it special assessed or something like that. So it ends up being a project cost. And then the utilities in this area are challenging, so there'll be upgrades to that as this project moves forward. But the costs from a TIF redevelopment perspective are more than I've ever seen. So as we work through this, this is the most challenging redevelopment TIF related project I've ever worked on. And the history shows it, because so many different people tried and it kept on falling to the next owner to try. And you can see with that long 17-year history of nothing happening here, that hopefully we're the last effort, and we're confident we have a plan that makes sense and can move forward. You can go to the next slide. So here's just a sampling of the underground parking, how we segmented the portions, and then the surface parking. Next slide. This is how it functionally works with the residences that are walkout units on the main floor, and then there's partial at-grade parking. Next slide. And this is the condo units. So we were missing, I think, is there one slide missing? There's a full residential on floors 2 and 3, and then the condo units. So this shows the condo units. Our goals with this was we have a single loaded corridor, and all of the condos either have views of the riverfront, Yumkamp Center overlooking downtown, or Wildflower Park, which is a pretty special feature in this neighborhood. We only have 2 condo units that face north. So that was carefully designed to figure out how do we get value for these in a eclectic, eccentric, and unique neighborhood. Next slide. And this shows some visuals, and you can just pan through these slowly, but I wanted to show the context of how this fits within the neighborhood and how the project will be here hopefully for my lifetime and more. So as you can see with the material palette, we looked at a lot of the adjacent structures, and we struggled to come up with something for, honestly, it was 22 iterations of design to come up with something that would fit really well with the neighborhood, that the neighbors would walk by, bike by, and see as a value add, and not something that we just stuck a ultra modern building in a historic neighborhood and said, this is it. So we feel really confident and comfortable with this design. Next.
It's the end.
And you guys got the PFM report, the extraordinary costs from soil correction, flood associated levee design, building demolition, asbestos abatement, tree removal, land, public infrastructure. We're building a cul-de-sac as desired by the city, which sort of end caps on the side and enters the parking structure. And then site constraints. It's a really tight site. And we needed to fit quite a bit on it, but still have it contextually fit within the neighborhood. And
Matt,
then
do you want to
legal-
kind of go through your report and your recommendation? You on?
Yeah, hi Jim. Do you want me to go through that now?
Yeah, please.
Okay. Unfortunately, I do not have, I cannot see the presentation, but I'll step through this report. Since it has been a while since we've gone through one of these. So let's start on page 1 with the purpose. I just state kind of what the purpose of this report is. I review the developer's application, build my own cash flow model, calculate an internal rate of return, and then kind of step through some of the policies as laid out in the tax increment financing policy that the city has to ensure that that's being followed. We'll go on to the next page, page 2, the project. I think that's been explained at this point. The TIF assistance, they're looking at $4.45 million, which they just went through the uses for those. So next page. This is the assistance request and kind of stepping through some of the policies that the city has. So here we have the requested reimbursement, the $4.45 million, which was just discussed. Policy number 8 limits the TIF assistance to 15% of hard construction costs. Based on what I saw in the developer's pro forma, that was $21.6 million, which results in $3.2 million of TIF. That's kind of the max TIF amount that could be received. That, according to my analysis, is going to be the limiting factor. You'll see on the next page when I get there that I have about 3.6 million of estimated TIF based on my assumptions on a present value basis. And then along with policy 8, the developer must put in at least 10% of equity, which they are certainly doing in this case. Right now, we, according to their pro forma and their application, they're at 25%. The other policy we look at is number 6, and that's just the land costs. It's a lesser of 2 test. They fall within that, so they're not requesting more land costs, reimbursement costs, than they are able to per this test. And they are requesting 15 years of TIF. And again, this TIF estimate, as I alluded to earlier, we're looking at on a present value basis, assuming a 4.55% discount rate. We're looking at about 3.6 million of TIF payment. The next page, project financing. As I mentioned, looking at 25% equity, privately financing about 19.5 million. However, this one is a little bit different because of those condos. And so their plan is over the next, after a couple of years, their plan is to take the much of their sales revenue from the condos and put it back into the project, namely reducing their loan amount, their principal on their loan amount, to reduce their principal and interest annual payments. And so right now, that's estimated to be about 4.9 million that they would be putting back in to reduce their costs. So that's estimating about $750,000 of profit, and taking that for the profit of the actual development of the condos. So that will reduce their putting that 4.9 million in will reduce their P&I quite a bit, and really helps with this project in the cash flow of the project. So moving on to 6. So this is where I start to do my analysis. I start by looking at all the assumptions that the developer has laid out. I often communicate directly with the developer. I know I talked with Enclave on a number of occasions, just to make sure I had all my questions answered. And they, their assumptions certainly seemed reasonable. I also like to look at total expenses as a percent of revenue. Theirs were about 34% of gross operating income, which is, from what I've experienced, on the lower side of things, but they could have some efficiencies where they are able to drop that. And for this analysis, it's actually conservative for these purposes. So I was fine with the 34%. Then I look at an internal rate of return, and I typically do this on a 10-year basis. That's usually what you look at it. I also wanted to look at it on a 15-year basis because they are requesting TIF for 15 years. So I looked at that, and I would say, for 10-year, it's 13.67 is what I have IRR. For a project like this, I think that's on the lower side. There's certainly some risk involved with this project, especially with the condos and in the housing market, that usually isn't present if we just have just looking at a rental development. And so I upped up, I think it should, have a reasonable rate of return, 13 to 20%. So they are on the lower end. And so aside from the internal rate of return, I also look at coverage, because they are going to need to meet coverage in order to get a loan. And so typically that's in the 1.2 times range is the minimum, absolute minimum coverage they could hit to be in compliance with their loan. And I believe I did confirm that with Enclave earlier, but please speak up if that is not the case. Okay. So then I run some sensitivity scenarios. What if these are not, what has been laid out in the pro forma in an application is not accurate? What if their project costs are reduced? What happens? How much would they have to be reduced to make the project work? In this case, it was 16%, which is a pretty big dip, especially at this stage in the game. I think they should have a pretty good handle at this point on where their project costs are going to come in, and typically project costs do not come in lower. If they do come in different from projected, it's typically higher, as I think we all have experienced. The second scenario I look at, rental rates. What if they increase rental rates from what they are proposing in their application? This one was over 30%. They would have to increase rates, which is significant, and we really don't see that occurring. They would be priced out, I think, of the market, and they wouldn't. I don't see many renters renting at those rates. So I do not see that scenario occurring. And then I kind of look at a combo of the two. So how much would the project have to reduce, and how much would rental rates have to increase at the same time? So we're looking at project cost drop of just about 8% and rental rates of about 16%. And again, I think those are both high and are not likely to occur, especially together. And so in conclusion, on the last page, I think we showed between the internal rate of return and the coverage, which was under the 120 without public assistance, that this project really could not go forward. And I think it sounds like that's been proven a few times with past developers. But we have the internal rate of return estimated to be 13, just about 14%, with public assistance. In year 10, a coverage of a 1.48 times, which is well above the minimum 120. So at this point, I guess I do want to point out, as you all know, with it being a pay-go TIF, the developer is the one at risk. And so that really isn't putting the city on the hook for anything other than possibly having partially developed land in the city if the project does not move all the way forward to completion. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Very good. Thank you very much. Are there any questions? And maybe when there are, could I ask you for a favor? Could we pull up the pictures again of the project just so we could, I'm a little bit of a visual learner, and I think everybody else would appreciate to see that too. Just so if you can just talk a little bit, if we can go back a couple slides just about the levy and just kind of explain that as best you can with the pictures that we have there. Would that be possible? And I don't know who can do that, but to me, if you look at the reimbursement, a large amount of that is for the, you know, the remediation and the soil and also the levee. And so, Jesse, and then if you don't mind, since I have the mic a little bit, I'd also like to know, we've obviously lost a lot of housing in that area because of the flood protection. And so it'd be interesting to know the number of housing lots that have been removed, you know, where we've purchased houses, just so we have, for the record.
Yeah, I believe it's been well over 40 single-family homes and several small apartment buildings. Was involved in 97 after buying out a lot of them.
Right. And so I think that's a good number to know, that we're trying to, this will help repopulate that neighborhood a little bit. To me, that's part of the selling point of this. So I think that would be a good number to know for the future. All right, Jesse, go ahead.
I think you can see the flood control line on this image kind of follows along here. And what they do now during a flood fight is they'll bring in a temporary dike in this area. It kind of connects with the railroad tracks. And so the advantage of this thing would be that it would protect not only during a current 100-year flood, but even a 500-year flood with the diversion.
So, and I guess the other thing is, so this would be permanent, would it be certified and all that kind of stuff? That's my other question. Yeah. That, I mean, from the common sense standpoint, we want to have permanent levees and not be doing temporary. Yep. And so, and would this also be to the 40-foot, you know, requirements that we're doing with the rest of our levees? So go ahead, Justin.
Yeah, everything's gone through, had about $46,000 worth of design work done by KLJ to make sure it meets all those design levy requirements. Everything will be excavated down to where we have stable soil, so everything will be done up to speed. Engineering would have to approve all of that. They've already seen the preliminary plans and signed off on that. So I think, we do have a fair amount of that levee already designed, but in the southeast corner is where we would tie on to and continue back all the way to Oak Grove or Oak Street. By the time it gets to Oak Street, it's only about 6-inch high levee, just because of the contours of the land. But the need for the levee is really a requirement by the city, that without that levee being built, there can be no new construction on that site. And so one of the things we worked through with the neighborhood was when they came in, they said, well, why don't you put townhomes in there and things of that nature? And we're like, I can't put a $300,000 levy on this and spread that across 4 townhomes or 4 new homes. It just doesn't work. And then, like Austin had mentioned, the amount of poor soil that's in there, they've got close to 14 to 16 feet of actual rubble that's been dumped there over decades, that has to be all removed and taken out. So, there's a lot of time and money and energy spent on this, and it's been, you said, act of passion or love or stupidity, because you look at carrying costs of $16,000 a month on this thing, and it's been quite a trudge.
Can I ask for another favor? The other thing that would be good to know is what the current tax payments are for this area, and obviously maybe for the past, obviously not back too far, but also what the future would look like. I think that would be a good number, Jim.
Okay. Yeah, I don't have that, but I believe there's only, there are 4 plexes occupied now.
Well, yeah, the city reassessed everything to my chagrin. Right now, on that entire block, the taxes are about $22,000 a year.
But you get what I'm saying. So I have to tell you a little story. So the first house I ever owned was at 51 6th Avenue North, which is right on the corner. And so that's been basically nothing there as long as can recall. And so when you look at the amount of tax money that's coming in, it's been pretty negligible. Wouldn't you summarize it as that?
Yeah, before the land was rezoned DMU and stuff like that, I think the entire block was close to $8,000 to $12,000, and now it's gone up, because I've held the land for 12, probably close to 6 years now. So as I said, the city's been reassessing it as we've taken the blight and the demoed the vacant houses and the houses that were squatted on and things of that nature. So I think the backstory has really been about the relationship and the meetings I've had with the city or with the neighborhood, and there's support of it, and trust that they have in me, and now with Enclave and myself, and producing something that's going to actually, I mean, you can't say that a 5-story building is going to fit any neighborhood, but I think that they see this as a catalyst for other development in town. When you've got something of this stature being built in there, it's going to add comps, even condo sale comps for new home ownership or new home construction in that area. So I think that's what they're looking for, is just a renewal of that whole area. It's the oldest neighborhood in Fargo. It's got the school, it's got the park, the wildflower, groves, all that stuff, the views of the downtown, of the river. All of those things just lend to, like Austin said, a very special site. So one of the promises I made to the neighborhood, and this is only phase 1, there is a phase 2, a separate parcel of land in the northwest corner that I'm going to develop. That's going to be more of townhomes or condo units that will be rented initially and then sold down the road. But that was the promise to the neighborhood, is that we would bring in families and home ownership. And also the fact that we're bringing in 117 new tenants that will fall in love with the neighborhood and the area, and ultimately want to buy homes in the area and raise their families.
And I'll just add that people that live in apartments also have kids.
Yep.
And so there will be families and in those condos. And so that's good for that school as well. So I think it's a great project, and I do appreciate your labor of love, and it has been sitting there for a long time, but I think it's good to tell the whole story, because it's there's a lot to it.
Yeah.
The difficulty with the soil, I think that's, from our city's perspective, that's a reasonable thing, and I would encourage you to show that to us too, if you can, the best you can. So,
Sure.
And I apologize for hogging the microphone. Any other questions I'd love to have?
I'll commend both Austin and Jesse and even Mr. Gilmore for making a good presentation. I'll admit that coming into this meeting, I was not enthusiastic about approving this application, but you guys have done a really good job explaining it, and really pointing out the unique character and challenges of this site. I'm still concerned that it's not consistent with our policy number 8, and that's something that we need to debate, and I would expect city commissioners to raise that as a point. But I think you've done a really good job explaining the uniqueness of the site, and you've helped move my mindset on this project. I'll leave it like that.
Well, we've tried to go a little bit above and beyond also with the cul-de-sac. We're working with Jeremy Gordon right now in extending from Oak Street on that cul-de-sac to extend the bike path that would go along the south border of this, along the levee, and then drop over the levee and tie into the bike path that goes underneath the railroad tracks that leads to downtown. So there's some connectivity too that's going to go along with the neighborhood in downtown. So.
Hey, Matt, if you're still on the line, I just wanted to clarify that policy number 8 that limits them to 3.2 million. Is that what you assumed was the maximum they'd receive?
I assumed that in the actual analysis that it was getting everything that it could.
And that would
that was being.
And the present value of that was about 3.5.
Yeah, about 3.6.
Okay. So even.
And that's with that's if the hard costs. That's assuming the 21.6 million of hard costs, or the limitation of the 3.2 million.
So how these TIF notes work is that they receive back whatever property taxes are paid, and so even though there's 4 million in eligible costs, they're going to be limited to 15 years, and the present value of that's about 3.6 million. So they would not receive that full amount. They're going to just get whatever they create.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I'd like to compliment you as well. Sometimes there's some advantages to a neighborhood. It's hard to put a dollar sign to, But I had the same question Jim did. Thanks. Just looking ahead to next week, we'll get together and motions will be made, a vote will be taken. And if we have a TIF policy exception, Jim, I'd just like to ask you to be prepared for that.
Sure.
And maybe another question relating to that policy 8, Jim, do you recall from a historical perspective why policy 8 was even drafted the way it was? Do you have much recollection about when that came about and what its intent was?
I think the intent was to just to limit it to a certain amount that the city would be not paying for, say, 25% of a project. In reality, with our property tax rate, it's rarely you can even get up to that 15% because often the hard costs are this particular project has a relatively, I think, high property value for the investment just because of the land value. But it was to kind of give an indication of the developers what to really expect, because it's really hard to get more than 15%. As you can see, there's no way to get to that 4 million, and the maximum at about probably 3.5 in reality, where the policy would limit you to about 3.2.
Very good. Any other questions? Well, thank you very much. I appreciate both presentations. I apologize, we're not going to give you a definitive answer today, but we will, like I said, we'll meet online or on the phone, and then we will be in contact with you, and then we'll, our plan is to get this decision made before the next city commission meeting. So we'll be in touch. Thank everybody for coming. It's 1:43. Have a beautiful afternoon. We are